Welcome to the Liberty Insider. This is a program bringing you religious liberty news and evaluation and discussion on things that are happening really all around the world, but very often starting in the United States. My name is Lincoln Steed, editor of Liberty magazine, and my guest on this program is Carmela Monk Crawford, editor of Message magazine. And I started a filming sequence with you recently by talking about Message.
Yes.
But I love that name. What is the message of Message?
Oh my goodness, the message for us, the message that we want to relay to people, the 3 R's: redemption, relationship, and readiness. That is the message that we want to let people know that, number one, you've been bought with a price. The value that each individual that we know has is something that not only does God recognize, but we recognize.
Well, that's very good.
Yes.
I like that summary because I was hoping the name just begs it. It's outward reaching to tell something to other people and to share something of great value. Liberty is more, to me it sounds more like doing and going, you know, it's flags, it's the Bastille, but in reality, I like to define it the same way. It's got to have a spiritual, redemptive element, or it's just legalese.
Right, right.
And religious liberty can very easily devolve, and I don't know how well it goes down with some of my fellow religious liberty leaders, but I tell them, you know, it's not about just court cases and precedent.
Right.
There's something big here, and for Seventh-day Adventists, religious liberty always ran concurrent with our worldview and a prophetic expectation, which really is hopeful, not, you know, we're not doomsdayers like the world is about to end. It might be, but a new world is about to begin, so it's exciting.
Yeah, yes. And it's preserving that space so that we could each have that relationship and realize the redemption, and realize it as put to us or given to us.
Absolutely.
So.
And you know, our church, I think, is doing good things in many areas, but it's a good thing to remind ourselves about this root reason for doing things like, or for producing things like Message and Liberty and other programs, although you're an editor too. To me, magazines and editing and the promulgation of materials is central to what we're about. I'm not quite onto Twitter and these other things. Obviously, that's making the world shake on its axis or shake on its foundations. But I think there's a lot of superficiality in some of this electronic communication. But to have this meaty little package given to you, there can be a lot rolled up in that, right?
You're speaking my language. This is only an editor. We can sit here and talk about that all day long because you're right. People wonder about the relevance of the vehicle. I believe the message is what's on the vehicle that's very relevant, but I also believe the vehicle in this case. I believe God preserved liberty and Message for a reason, even in the light of the publishing industry and all the changes that have made, and the fact that everybody is a publisher in his or her own right when they take to their thumbs on Twitter or they're on social media. Everybody is a publisher in themselves.
Right. And, you know, we have many discussions, and you're part of the same ones where I think those that don't have as much respect for what made our church, and indeed what made the Reformation. It was printing and publishing and promulgation of pamphlets and all the rest that got Luther on the map. He wouldn't have got to first base but for the printed material that went out and around. But I listen to people that are very enamored with the new techniques, and goodness knows there's great possibilities, but they forget that's really reverting to what always has been here. The greatest promulgation of ideas is word of mouth. You can't stop that, but since printing began, it's a way to put this word of mouth message down in a systematic, well-organized, well-presented fashion. And I know when you edit, I'm sure you do the same as I do. I look at what article goes with what, because sometimes the whole is greater than the individual.
Yes,
because this can set you up for that other article where in isolation maybe they wouldn't even see why should I read that. No interest, but it could lead to it.
Yes, there are many times when I will read through the magazine and proofs and everything, and it's at the end that I'm saying, and I can't say that there are many magazines or publications that I'll read all the way through, but because of what we do, by the time you get to the end of it, you realize there was a message in this. There is something that is important. And as you said, the new forms or of communication sort of revert back to what we've often had. But what still holds true for our printed materials is that they make a case, a systematic case that works differently physiologically between your fingers and your head, that is more persuasive. It leads to better retention, and the critical analysis that's involved in reading the material really
I love
works
the way
on
you're saying this.
You're
speaking to the
I know,
converted.
we're on the same wavelength, and a lot of maybe a dying breed, but I don't think so. That's why I say I believe God preserved us.
No, we're not a dying breed, but the idea is being challenged.
Right.
And this doesn't prove the point, but it's an interesting anecdote. I can remember when I was young, at the onset of computers and computer memory and so on, the paperless office was coming. I don't know, there's more paper floating around than ever before.
Yes.
Even when you have the files and all the rest, there's this overwhelming need to run it out, see it, put your hand on it, visualize it. And,
underline it and highlight it.
I don't see any evidence whatsoever that reading and a visual representation, whether it used to be on stone tablets or clay tablets, it's not going away, but the patterns are shifting.
Yes.
The worst thing, though, that I say, and we can't change anything by discussion here, but I do think literacy, or at least practical literacy, is dropping in the Western world.
Absolutely.
And I don't know how we deal with that, because online, they're not going to get it if they won't read more than the paragraph or comprehend more than the paragraph at a time.
Right. And like we were saying, the critical analysis that's necessary to process this information, it goes to the very heart of the issue with Facebook and our elections and everything. You know, you have to read behind the headlines. You have to read, and you have to question who would say this and what's behind why they would say this, and who has a stake in this and an interest in this. These are all tools that not only keep our country and our society going, but it is crucial to who you are as you understand your role and your that spiritual part of you. You have to, you know, it's a deeper level. It's not a surface thing.
And then the other thing, and this is an unabashed ad, but people need to know this. Our new president has gained a lot of traction by talking about fake news. And there always has been fake news, but what I think it's increasing is suspicion of people to information, no matter where they get it. And it's worth remembering that magazines in particular, since we're talking about magazines that have been around a long time, certainly should have some credibility and reliability for information.
Right.
Where you go on the internet, they talk about information being spread, more information than ever before. It's on the internet, it's not in people's heads. But you go there, and here's a cornucopia of information, and it ranges from the overly intellectual for the Mensa crowd to nonsense. There is not a human being on the planet that has the mental ability or the time to digest all of that and turn it into something reliable. So, like it or not, we have to rely on intermediaries.
Yes.
And editors are a key one. And I keep reminding myself that our movement, the Seventh-day Adventist movement, followed on from the Millerite Bible studies and expectation of the imminent return of Christ. But this movement is ridden on the backs of publications and editors. They weren't just within the system, they were the system. Right,
and challenging problems all along the way. And as we've been talking, as I've come to be here with you at this time, we're talking those early editors, it was not only a printed responsibility, they were also commenting on the social problems of the time and matching that and looking at it against prophecy and their biblical understanding and putting it out there for people to read. What a beautiful thing, but you don't see that long form analysis anymore of of both what's happening in society, and as I read the Word and I try to compare and I try to look and I try to go behind the scenes, you don't see that anymore.
No, well, because the expectation of editors and the reliance on them is gone. An editor is not, as they used to come by when I worked at a publishing house, and we'd see some of us proofreading or copy editing. Oh, doing that all day, how horrible, you know. I've heard people say that, but they think that's what an editor does, just line editing. That is the end of the game, perhaps, before you assemble the thing. But an editor brings critical judgment. He's is the ideas person, setting the direction, and it's by no accident. I'm going to invoke crazy figure. But it's no accident that Mussolini became dictator of Italy. He was a newspaper editor. That was his.
Yeah.
No, and you can see it over and over again. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf, putting to. I could make a good case that he never would have got anywhere as the individual leader. I think Nazism was inevitable, something as malignant as that. But he is the leader. No, it was his book and his writings that catapulted him to
we have to
people's
watch
notice.
the people who control.
And those were bad ideas, but good ideas sometimes are harder to sell, but they should have a greater influence in the long run.
Yeah, we have to watch who is behind the communication for sure. And we have to be involved and actively a part of what's going on, what is being said.
But how we change society into reading, I don't know. I really don't know that. The Bible says that at the end of time, it was in Daniel, but he's talking about the end of time, knowledge shall be increased and men will run to and fro. You know, that sounds like the second half sounds more like ADHD than
that does sound like ADHD.
There's knowledge around, but you're running.
Running to and fro, can't get it.
Although the Bible does say ever learning and never arriving at the truth.
Well, and we are inundated with a lot of information. It is hard to get to that golden needle in the haystack, which I believe that you have the responsibility of being, I often say, the watchman on the wall, watching the things. It's not just, like you said, one piece at a time and trying to discover, you know, the copy editing problems or copy issues. It's the overall, what is on the horizon that we should be looking at.
Well, we're getting close to the end of the segment. Tell me, from Message's point of view, what is coming up that's not just one of your or two of your articles? Where do you think the challenge lies? And you can broaden it beyond religious liberty, but what is on the horizon? Where are you moving? What's the burning topics of the day?
Conscience is always a big deal for us. I believe that conscience, how you exercise your conscience, when you're going to exercise your conscience, how you work in a society. Last year we talked about Colin Kaepernick, who is being so not just marginalized, but somehow demonized for his view. And we're talking his protest of a symbolic national anthem. And our quest is to figure out what is it that is worth fighting for? How do I make my case? How do I practice in conscience, knowing what it is that God has called me to do? That is always a big issue. How do I continue to exercise my conscience?
I knew when I put you on the spot that you would give a very succinct analysis where you're heading with Message Magazine. And I hope one day to be able to do that with Liberty. But for now, we multiply words. And if you stay with us after a short break, we'll be back to continue a discussion of how we apply these powerful ideas that are embodied, in this case, in Message Magazine and Liberty Magazine. Welcome back to Liberty Insider. Before the break, Carmela, you'd given a wonderful vision statement from the point of view of your magazine. But, you know, we're not there yet, are we?
No.
We've got a big challenge ahead of us. It's a big world. And so much of religious liberty and message, you know, has to, by definition, deal with close at hand. But I'm impressed when I look at Message Magazine how broader its scope is than when it was first envisaged, wasn't it?
Well, I believe
it dealt with, I think, a particular need and a very particular target audience. But There's a lot in message now. In fact, I should give you a medal on this, or you might wear it as a medal, but I think in many ways message has got more utilitarian general coverage sometimes than Science, a magazine that our church has printed to reach out to the general public for a long time.
Wow, you're blowing me away. You're blowing.
Well, it's real world stuff.
Praise God, because that is something that we want to make sure that we're dealing with the real world. And for us, for many people, I think they take for granted, especially in people who grew up as a Seventh-day Adventist, as I did, things such as health and vegetarianism, they take it for granted. But as I'm looking now and I'm seeing people incorporate a vegan or a completely plant-based lifestyle, and I'm seeing people do this, these have real-world effects. Especially when so many people do not have access to health care. So many people cannot pay for it. Many people are struggling with all this. But you could, the very prevalent health conditions such as diabetes and obesity, these are things that can be addressed. Just compound. They can be addressed just by what you're having to eat, and your mind could be clear, and your children could do better in school, and you can have a better night's sleep. And so,
well, I've said it before on this program, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church for many years in the minds of a lot of people that know nothing else about the church is that it's got a health message.
Right.
And many Adventists, I think, have forgotten why we had it. It wasn't to live longer. It was for a spiritual reason. And Ellen White made a comment that to me is mind-blowing. She said that the only way that heaven has of contacting us is through the nerve endings.
There you go. And
so that's an immediately practical reason to be of healthy mind and therefore body. I mean, body and therefore mind. Your spiritual connections are at their peak.
Right, and that goes back to what we were talking about before, the ability to read something and to make the critical thoughts and analysis behind what's going on, and to be able to meditate on something and to think. And that's what we're trying to do, is make sure we put this stuff out.
Let me put the real hot question to you.
Go ahead.
You're an editor and you've read different studies, and all of the surveys show that the average readability level of people has dropped precipitously. It's some grade school level at the moment. When you're dealing with complex and important topics, how do we communicate that to people whose comprehension is dropping below a certain threshold?
Oh, I love that. You know what I do is the easy way, but and that's the beauty of the technology at the same time, is that we can make sure that we are not accommodating, but we're making sure that we are accessible to everyone whose strength is not reading and whose attention span is short. God didn't call us to be impressive intellectually. He called us to reach people. Well, and so that's the way I look at it.
Well, you're actually ahead of my next comment, but I'll still make it anyway. It worries me sometimes, an idea that's not directly stated but implied, that to understand salvation requires certain intellectual ability and application. And if that's so, a lot of this world is going to miss out. At root, it has to be a very simple idea, but I like to think that with editing and promulgating materials, a very simple idea still can require a systematic and never-ending explanation in its larger ramifications.
Right.
But the central idea has to be very simple and easily understood by almost anyone, as long as it's correctly and clearly stated.
Yeah, and that's part of our ongoing mission, to make sure that we are more and more accessible to people whose strength is not reading, and whose strength is not attention and long-form reception of that kind of thing. And so it's important.
But back to what I stated in an earlier program, and you probably have ideas on it too, but you and I belong to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm a fourth generation. It's all that I've known within my close circle. I've lived most of my life in the US, came from Australia, but I know the US pretty well. And it seems to me that both our church, and by definition many other churches, and the country at large is suffering from a rapid and recent decline in people's comprehension of the basics that make up both the church and a democratic state. And I don't see how either can really survive long with gross ignorance.
No, it cannot.
The US won't survive even if the Supreme Court continue to do a pretty good job. They've made a few bloopers, but they give long and considered legal evaluation. But so what if the people are forgotten? We're not to be paralleled with Rome all the time, but it seems to me the people of Rome got mixed up in their entertainments, and the Senate became riven with strife and self-interest, and pretty soon they had emperors and dictators and madmen ruling them. And the church the same. Pretty soon you can have mad prophets leading you, or worse, bureaucratic functionaries.
And all because either we didn't maintain that knowledge, or we just didn't dig hard enough to know what those principles were at work. You remind me of a situation I had once. I was teaching a law class, a criminal procedure kind of class once, and I had in my class of people, they were it was not a law school class, but in college level, and I had one of the campus security people that were there. I mean, talking about when is it right to stop someone? When is it right to confront someone with deadly force? And I remember one of the test papers came back from the security guy that it's okay to shoot a shoplifter. You know, it's okay to shoot, you know, I mean, somebody that you think is doing it, it's okay to do it. And I think at a basic level, there used to be a time when everybody had a sense of what our freedoms required and what they gave, and you knew who you were and what you could say. These are my rights. And this is, you can't go beyond this. But when we let go of those, there's just gross ignorance and gross miscarriages of justice.
You know, it works on many, many levels, and you're getting to a really pertinent one. I mean, the police are guilty of that, even without malice. They're losing a proportionality on
well, that's just an example.
But where I heard something that made my blood run cold, and it's gotten worse. During the election of 2000, I heard over and over again that if the majority wants something, it goes. When the whole basis of religious liberty is protecting the minority against the majority, and we are not a majoritarian system. In fact, in the narrowest sense, the United States is not a democracy. It's a democratic system. It's a representative republic. The republic means that the power derives from the people, but the structure is representative. People choose someone to represent them in the governing system. But if the 300 million people want something, and if it's against the principles that the Constitution and the country is founded on, it's still not going to happen. And I think that people have lost sight of that, and to me, that's the straight and narrow, well, not narrow, the straight and wide road to despotism.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that's the beauty on which this country was founded. Call it what you like. There was a carve out. There was a carve out for people, the religious minorities, the people who were strangers on the shores. There's a carve out so that there was not the tyranny of the majority. There was an ability to make sure that you don't just get outvoted or marginalized or pushed aside in favor of everyone.
And you know, I try to say too that religious liberty does not mean that I like your religion or your moral viewpoint, but I should be willing to defend your right to hold that to the death.
Absolutely.
If you hold that, religious liberty is safe.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of those things where we all have to learn how to blend what it is, my interest against your interest. How do we continue to live and strive together without me overcoming or overpowering you and not being or succumbing to your views or to the views? And today, unfortunately, this is something the person with the biggest mouth or the best social media gets to rule the day. That's not the way it's supposed to be.
Giving a message. Years ago, when my father died, and while he was suffering in hospital, he said that he had a dream, and in the middle of the night, he got up, got out of his bed, and went to a nearby Indian church, and he said to them, I'm gravely ill, I cannot stay, but I have a message to give to you. He says it's 4 words: trust in the Lord. Message magazine, I think, is as succinct as that. It began with a message of trust and compassion for a certain subgroup of the American experience, and it still caters to minorities, but I think its message, as the general message of salvation, is broadened to accomplish or to encompass a great many of the daily challenges that we all face. And that challenge, that particular challenge, must include a challenge of religious liberty. For Liberty Insider, this is Lincoln Steed.